Take the stand, you overgrown hippo in a hoodie. Let's get this circus over with. The words echoed off the courtroom walls like a slap to the face. The laughter that followed, from two white bailiffs in the corner and a few smirking onlookers, cut through Aria Wallace's chest deeper than any gavel ever could. She shuffled to the defendant's podium, oversized hoodie pulled over her head like a shield. Her brown eyes, wide and glossy, scanned the room for a flicker of kindness. There was none. Just stares, cold, judging, hungry for entertainment. She was only 17. Aria had been picked up outside a convenience store the night before, accused of shoplifting a $2 bottle of lotion. No evidence. No surveillance footage. No witnesses. Just the word of a clerk who felt uncomfortable with her presence. Now she stood accused in front of Judge Harold Whitmore, a man whose robe barely concealed the arrogance stitched into his every gesture. You know what the real crime is? The judge sneered, leaning forward as if delivering a sermon. You walking around pretending you belong in this society. You're a walking warning sign. If it isn't theft today, it's armed robbery tomorrow. You people never change. Aria's lips quivered, but no words came out. Public defender? Absent. Support system? None. She had begged the officers for a phone call last night, but was told to wait until morning. Let the record show, Whitmore said, waving a dismissive hand, that the defendant has shown zero remorse, no evidence of rehabilitation potential, and in fact, continues to smirk at the bench. I'm not smirking, Aria managed to whisper. Silence, the judge barked. You'll speak when spoken to, but don't worry, Ms. Wallace. Your future doesn't require many words. He reached under the desk and retrieved a file. His fingers tapped it rhythmically before opening. Under emergency judicial authority and citing subsection 14B of the Federal Urban Crime Act, Whitmore declared, eyes gleaming with false authority, this court is recommending you for expedited sentencing to a federal youth detention program with lethal correction protocols. The words made the court clerk pause. Even the bailiffs blinked. Lethal correction? Aria gasped. Wait. What does that even mean? She stammered. It means, the judge leaned in, voice like ice. We remove threats before they blossom. No more tax dollars wasted on hopeless cases like you. The room fell silent. For a moment, time stopped. Aria's knees buckled. She gripped the stand like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to the earth. I want my phone call, she said through clenched teeth. The judge chuckled. Oh, I bet you do. Fine. 10 minutes. Don't waste them crying. The bailiff led her into a side chamber. Aria's hands were trembling so hard she almost dropped the phone. She dialed a number she hadn't used in 2 years. He picked up on the first ring. Jay? She whispered. It's me. They called me a hippo. Said I'm getting executed. I don't know what's happening. Please, come now. There was silence on the other end. Then a calm voice replied, Stay right there. I'm 10 minutes away. And Aria? Don't say another word to anyone. The call ended. Back in the courtroom, Judge Whitmore leaned back smugly, humming to himself. Proceed with detainment, he ordered. But just as Aria was being shackled, a distant thump echoed through the hall. Then another. A sharp shout. Footsteps, dozens of them. The courtroom door rattled. Then, boom, the doors flung open, and everything changed. The sound of the courtroom doors crashing open silenced every breath in the room. Judge Whitmore's gavel froze midair. Bailiffs reached instinctively for their belts. Aria turned her head slowly, heart pounding louder than the noise itself. In stepped a tall black man in a crisp black suit, polished boots clicking with authority, and a gold badge clipped to his belt that glinted under the courtroom lights. His gaze swept the room like a spotlight, cold and controlled. Behind him, 3 U.S. Marshals entered in formation. No hesitation, no confusion. Just purpose. Judge Whitmore rose from his chair. What is the meaning of this? He barked. This is a private judicial proceeding. The man in the suit didn't even blink. He walked straight toward the bench, ignoring the glares, the confusion, the whispered questions. Then he stopped 3 feet from the judge and said in a calm, chilling voice. I'm here for my sister. Arya gasped, eyes widening. Jason. The judge narrowed his eyes. Jason. Wallace. Jason opened his coat, slowly revealing a DOJ badge, Deputy Director of Federal Oversight and Prosecutorial Conduct. He locked eyes with Whitmore. You violated federal protocol, abused judicial discretion, issued an unlawful death sentence on a minor for an unverified misdemeanor, all while spewing racial slurs inside a court of law. I have transcripts, recordings, and 17 prior complaints linked to your docket, every one buried under falsified case closures. Whitmore laughed, but the sound cracked. You expect me to believe some junior clerk with a badge can? Jason stepped forward, his voice low but unshakable. I'm not a clerk, and you're no judge. Not anymore. One of the marshals handed him a file. Jason flipped it open and began reading aloud, each word slicing through the silence. Docket hashtag 22-9413. Tampering with court transcripts. Docket hashtag 23-0278. Bias rulings in juvenile cases, 100% against minority defendants. Docket hashtag 24-1102. Unauthorized use of lethal sentence code under non-applicable federal statute. Jason snapped the file shut. Your courtroom is now a crime scene. Your authority has been revoked. The entire room was frozen. The bailiffs looked at each other. The clerk shifted uncomfortably. Judge Whitmore's face flushed beet red. This is an outrage. You have no jurisdiction. I have every jurisdiction. Jason turned slowly to the marshals. Cuff him. Whitmore backed up a step. Don't you dare. Two marshals moved swiftly. The gavel slipped from Whitmore's hand and clattered onto the bench as his arms were pulled behind his back. You're making a mistake, he hissed. I've been on this bench for 30 years. Jason looked at him coldly. Exactly. 30 years too long. Arya stood frozen, mouth open, barely able to process what was happening. The man who had humiliated her, who had just tried to sentence her to death, was now being dragged from the bench in cuffs. Jason turned to his sister. Are you okay? She nodded slowly, but tears spilled down her cheeks. How did you know? I've been monitoring this district for 6 months, he said softly. Your name popped up in the same batch as 3 other cases I already had flagged. When I saw it, I dropped everything. But how did you get here so fast? Jason smiled faintly. Because I never stopped watching you. He walked to her and gently took her hands. It's over. He can't hurt you now. And yet, in the silence that followed, the judge muttered something as he was pulled past her. You think this ends with me? Jason paused, jaw tightening. He didn't answer. Not yet. But something in his eyes said this was just the beginning. The courtroom buzzed like a disturbed hive. Judge Whitmore had just been dragged out in cuffs, snarling like a man stripped of his kingdom. But Jason Wallace didn't flinch. He stood motionless, as if the moment hadn't fazed him in the slightest. His composure was unshaken, but his eyes were locked on the door through which Whitmore had vanished. Arya sat quietly on the bench, clutching her arms tightly around her body. The tears had stopped, but her mind hadn't. Every breath still carried the tremble of the threat she had only narrowly escaped. Jason finally turned to the marshals. Secure this courtroom. No one leaves. Not even the clerk. Yes, sir. 2 marshals stepped forward and closed the courtroom doors behind them. The metallic click of the locks echoed like a final stamp. Jason walked over to the judge's bench and set down a large manila folder. The name on the front read, Operation Gavel Dust. The court clerk's eyes widened. Wait, that's real? I thought that was just internal buzz. It was real enough, Jason said, flipping open the folder and revealing color-coded charts, surveillance screenshots, and confidential testimonies. 15 federal judges under investigation. 9 already removed. Whitmore was number 10. He looked at the clerk. You know how many of his cases never made it to public record? The clerk swallowed hard. A few, I guess. Jason tossed a paper onto the table. 63. Dozens of kids sentenced without proper defense. Many disappeared into detention rehab centers that don't even show up on government contracts. He turned back to the gallery, raising his voice so every person in the room could hear. You all just witnessed what he tried to do to a 17-year-old girl, with no evidence, no lawyer, and no regard for the law. If anyone in this room covered for him, it ends today. We're pulling transcripts, reviewing every ruling, and reopening every juvenile case he ever touched. One of the bailiffs, previously laughing at Whitmore's joke, suddenly stood up straighter. Jason noticed. You got something to say? The bailiff hesitated, then shook his head. No, sir. Jason's gaze didn't leave him. I suggest you cooperate when internal affairs gets here, because if I find so much as a deleted call log or altered record, your badge will be the least of what you lose. A quiet hum of unease swept the room. The weight of the situation was settling in. Jason wasn't just some protective brother. He was a federal hammer, and today he had swung. He finally turned back to Arya. You'll be released today, he said, voice gentle now. Your record's being wiped. Clean. As if none of this ever happened. She blinked, overwhelmed. But it did happen. He nodded. I know. And we'll make sure the world knows it too. So no girl after you has to walk into a courtroom like that again. Arya stood slowly. Will he go to prison? Jason's jaw clenched. He'll face a federal tribunal. If I have my way, he'll never wear a robe again, and he'll answer for every life he crushed under that bench. A pause. Then, as if remembering something heavy, he turned back toward the gallery. This wasn't just about Arya. This was about power being used like a weapon. About fear parading around in a robe. And we're not done yet. He glanced at his marshals. Prep the files for Judge Holloway next. She's next on the list. One of the marshals nodded grimly. Yes, sir. Arya watched her brother, silent, strong, methodical, and realized something with a strange mixture of awe and relief. The system may have tried to destroy her, but her brother had become the system's reckoning. Foreman Leonard Briggs sat rigid in the front row of the gallery, face pale, lips pressed thin. A moment ago, he had been one of Judge Whitmore's most dependable allies, trusted to manage jury pools, organize daily hearings, and help streamline sentences for so-called high-risk youth. Now he couldn't feel his legs. Jason's words echoed like thunder in his chest. We're pulling transcripts, reviewing every ruling, and reopening every juvenile case. Leonard looked down at his hands, trembling slightly. Those hands had rubber-stamped dozens of documents. Documents he didn't read closely. Documents that sent kids, mostly black and brown, into holding facilities that smelled more like prisons than rehab centers. He thought of Arya, just a girl, bright eyes, terrified, sentenced like cattle, and he had watched it happen. Worse, he had helped it happen. Jason hadn't mentioned him by name, not yet, but Leonard knew it was only a matter of time. He looked up again. Jason was speaking with two marshals near the bench, handing them additional files, coordinating a sweep of archived rulings. Arya sat now with a blanket draped over her shoulders, sipping water. One of the female marshals had brought it for her. Her eyes were still puffy from tears, but there was something else in them now, something steel-like, as if she had reclaimed something stolen. Jason turned back toward the gallery, gaze sweeping again, and this time it landed squarely on Leonard. Their eyes locked. For a second, Leonard thought about standing, apologizing, offering cooperation. But then Jason broke eye contact and turned away. Silent, deliberate, final. That cut deeper than anything else. Because in that moment, Leonard realized Jason already knew his name, his role, his silence. And worse, Jason didn't need him anymore. The court clerk fidgeted nervously with a pen, whispering to a stenographer who looked equally shaken. One of the bailiffs who had laughed at the hippo in a hoodie insult was now whispering into a phone, eyes darting toward the door like he was calculating an escape route. The panic was contagious. Jason could feel it. That's why he didn't rush. He let it stew. Let the silence work for him. Finally, he addressed the room again. Anyone who sat through this hearing and did nothing, you're part of it. This isn't a purge. It's a reckoning. If you cooperated with Whitmore, now is the time to come forward. Leonard flinched. One bailiff raised a hand. I just followed orders. I didn't know about the lethal protocols. Jason held up a hand. No deals. Not here. Write it down. You'll be interviewed. He turned to Arya. You ready to go? She stood slowly. Can I walk out the front? He nodded. You can walk out however you want. Arya glanced at the doors, the same ones she entered through terrified just an hour earlier. Now she would walk through them alive. Free. Unbroken. Jason turned back to the Marshals. Secure the building. Nobody leaves until Internal Affairs finishes sweep 1. And I want surveillance footage pulled from the last 6 months. One Marshal saluted. Understood. As they walked toward the door, Arya paused and looked over her shoulder. At the bench, the gallery, the stained silence still hanging in the air. She locked eyes with Foreman Leonard. For a second, he looked like he might speak. But Arya turned away, and the door closed behind her, leaving Leonard Briggs behind in a courtroom filled with ghosts, and a guilt too loud to ignore. 3 weeks later, courtroom 3B was no longer the same. The tarnished wood paneling had been stripped. The seal behind the judge's bench had been taken down and replaced with a plain DOJ inspection banner. The place once ruled by fear and prejudice now felt sterile, dissected, like a crime scene preserved in time. Because that's exactly what it had become. Jason stood at the center of it all, his hands folded behind his back as federal officers moved in and out like clockwork. Boxes filled with court documents, case files, and hard drives were being loaded into black vans parked just outside. Every scrap of Whitmore's empire was being pulled apart, brick by brick, lie by lie. The headlines had already made the rounds. Federal judge arrested in juvenile abuse scandal. Operation Gavel Dust uncovers systemic targeting of black youth. U.S. Marshal's sister was nearly victim number 64. Jason hadn't read the articles. He didn't need to. He was writing the final one himself with actions, not ink. The last remaining pieces of the purge were underway. Judge Whitmore had been officially indicted on 24 federal charges, including judicial misconduct, child endangerment, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to traffic minors into private detention facilities. The death sentence ruling on Arya had sealed his fate. It was too obvious, too vicious, too indefensible. But Jason wasn't finished. He now stood before a hearing board made up of federal ethics inspectors, the Department of Justice's Internal Oversight Unit, and 2 state prosecutors reviewing the fallout. He spoke without hesitation. Leonard Briggs, the court foreman, has submitted a full confession, he said. He admitted to aiding in jury manipulation, skipping due process, and shredding complaint letters filed by families. The panel nodded solemnly. Jason continued. He's been sentenced to 7 years in a federal penitentiary, eligible for parole in 3. His cooperation helped accelerate charges against others. But make no mistake, he's not walking free. Next slide. Bailiff Morris and Clerk Hensley were both found complicit in falsifying documents. Their law enforcement certifications have been revoked. Hensley's plea deal will serve as testimony against 3 more courtrooms now under review. Jason clicked the final slide. And there she was, Arya, a new photo, her hair braided, chin held high, in front of a school banner. She's now enrolled in Howard University's dual credit program. We've arranged counseling, and she's been awarded a full scholarship under the Civil Rights Reclamation Fund. He paused. And as for the judge, Whitmore will be spending the rest of his life answering questions in a courtroom far less forgiving than his own. Silence. Then applause, small but firm, from the DOJ ethics chair. When the meeting ended, Jason exited quietly, stepping outside into the crisp air of early evening. Arya stood waiting by the steps. She smiled. So, is it over? He gave a soft nod. For him. For them. Yeah. It's over. She tilted her head. And for me. Jason looked at her with the same fierce protection he'd shown in the courtroom. But now it softened, turned proud. For you, he said, It's just beginning. They walked together toward the street. As they reached the car, Arya paused and looked back one last time at the building. Once a place of terror, now a broken monument to injustice. I used to think I was powerless, she said quietly. Like my voice didn't matter. Jason opened the car door for her. They made you think that. She stepped inside, turning one final glance toward the courthouse as if sealing the past. But you proved them wrong, she said. Jason smiled. No, he said, settling into the driver's seat beside her. You did. And as the engine roared to life, they drove off. Not into silence, but into a future reclaimed. One verdict at a time.